You're listening to the My Simplified Life podcast, and this is episode number 181. Welcome to the My Simplified Life podcast, a place where you will learn that your past and even your present don't define your future. Regardless of what stage of life you're in, I want you to feel inspired and encouraged to pursue your dreams, simplify your life, and start taking action today. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac, and I'm excited to share my stories and life lessons with you while taking you on my own journey. This is My Simplified Life. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac, and today is the book launch day, book pub day for Jane Delury. Her book is Hedge, and it is coming out from Zibby Books. It is amazing. I loved reading it. When I started the book, and I share this in the interview, I really didn't see it taking the turn that I thought it would, which is always exciting. To me, that's a sign of a great book when you're surprised right going into it. The book is about a woman named Maud who is a historian gardener. I didn't even know that this was a career that existed. It's not very popular here in the United States, as you'll learn, but it's Maud's job to go and really dig in the dirt to find out what types of plants and vegetation were grown in specific areas many, many years ago. And a lot of the book takes place here in the Bay Area, which totally excites me. I wanted to get addresses and to be able to go visit some of these places, but it also encompasses relationships, marriage, affairs, a mother-daughter relationship, parenting, co-parenting, family, mothers, and everything. It covers all of the different relationships that as a woman you experience. Maybe not all of them, because not everyone has the affair part in there, but you will see what that love looks like as well, and the struggles and the journey. And it's just simply a beautiful, beautiful book. So I was so excited to get to talk to Jane, to get to know her, and I know you are going to love her as well, and to hear how she was able to craft this beautiful novel and to incorporate so many different parts of the Bay Area and other places, and how she did that research. Hi, Jane.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming on. I am so excited to talk to you about your it's not debut because you've written other stuff, but your upcoming novel, which will be out today once this releases, Hedge. Can you take a moment to introduce yourself to everyone, please?
Sure. I was going to say we can call me almost debut, although not really, I guess. So yes, my name is Jane Delury. I'm the author of Hedge. I'm a fiction writer. I live in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm originally from Sacramento, California. And I went to UC Santa Cruz and I've spent a lot of time in the Bay Area growing up and when I was in college. And Hedge takes place partially in San Francisco. That's the San Francisco connection. And I've lived in Baltimore for many, many years. I'm a professor at the University of Baltimore, where I teach fiction in the undergraduate program and the graduate program. And I write short stories and, well, I guess novels, since
you're a busy lady.
Yeah, I'm busy. And I have two daughters who keep me less busy now because one of them is in college and the other one is almost 17. And a cat and a lot of houseplants and a husband.
I'm glad you have a lot of houseplants, because the book, I feel like you should be doing a lot of gardening, hence the name Hedge. But
yes,
I loved, let's just dive into it, because I loved the job of the main character, Maud, was it must be a real job, that she goes and digs up kind of gardens and discovers what was planted in the gardens from decades ago. I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah. So I think a lot of writers, we live vicariously through our characters. And this career of garden historian really fascinates me. It's less common in the US. It's much more common even as a term in the UK. And there are programs in England. Maud actually trains in England and works there for many years, working in Virginia Woolf's and Leonard Woolf's gardens. But yeah, garden historians find sites where gardens once existed, and they work with archaeologists to look at the soil and try to identify what grew there. They find features of the landscape like walls, stone walls that might still lie under the ground. And a really good example of this in the United States is at Monticello, where in the 1970s, a team unearthed the vegetable garden that Thomas Jefferson had designed. And in fact, there's an anecdote in Hedge where Maud uses the headbeams of her car to map out the surface of a lawn to see where these garden beds once existed 200 years ago. And that's actually an anecdote that I plucked from the story of Monticello, where that trick with the headbeams of a car was used. So it completely fascinated me. Obviously, gardens come with all of these metaphors about life and death and renewal and time. And so the idea of someone who looks back into the past and tries to find the garden that existed and bring it back to life was really captivated me.
I love it because I felt like I was learning a new job. And, you read these things and you're like, I wish I would have known about that. Like, then I could have maybe been like a historic gardener or historian. It's so fascinating. And being in the Bay Area, the book comes over here and you're in the Presidio. I've spent a lot of time in the Presidio. You talk about Alcatraz, and it's given me this new view on, I need to look closer at what there is when I'm there and what does this all look like. I love that renewed sense of, awareness that I'm now going to have when I go to these places that I know of, but to look everywhere at these
I
things.
love that. Thank you for saying that. I think Maud and I are very different in many ways, but one thing we share, I am very interested in the past and in sort of looking at landscape and thinking back in time. And so, that view really fascinates me. And in terms of landscape and history, there's also the question of what written record exists, right? And we know that the written records that exist favor, basically white European, often men. But there's a whole history of the landscape that exists just within the ground itself and the plants themselves. And more there's research being done into that. And the Bay Area is a great example of that. So it was also really interesting to move settings from Maud is at the beginning of the book is restoring this European based garden in the Hudson Valley. And then in the second part of the book, she is looking at the native landscape of the Bay Area, restoring a garden that was a cultivated garden at the Presidio, but also is learning to look at the landscape around her, the wild landscape and the native plants, and what she too is learning to see with new eyes, I think, in that second part of the book.
And just so people are aware, it's not a gardening book. Yes, it's not all about the flowers. And I went into it and I started reading it, and we won't give too much away, but I was like, oh, it's a love story. Oh, here we go. And then boom, it took a turn that I did not see coming at all. And then it kind of takes it from this love fantasy kind of road that these two are on and really brings it to reality. I feel like it was this fantasy of this is what's going to happen to no, this is real life. This is what happens when you are married to someone else, you're not happy, you have children, and there's just so much shit that goes on in real life.
Right. And it's a very obvious, it's a novel, so it's a very dramatic example of that. But I think it's something that is very true for anyone who has kids or has any kind of family responsibility. There's the dream and the romance of what you want to pursue, whether it's in new love, which Maud is finding in New York, or, pursuing the dream of your career. And I think a central question of the book is, how do we do that while still being responsible to the people we love and taking care of them. So it's a dramatic example of those two things clashing in this book. But that central issue is something that I've wrestled with in my own life, and I think a lot of people wrestle with. So in terms of theme, I think that's what you're putting your finger on.
And how did you come up with the whole theme in general? Like, you're obviously a professor teaching fiction, which I think is amazing. I don't know how you teach that. I need to take a class because I'm like, I've got stories in my head, but to put them out on paper and to create characters, and there's just a whole map that goes with it. So how did this book come to life?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I spend a lot of time teaching and talking about fiction and editing my students' manuscripts and running workshops where we talk about how could this be improved. But when I write, I basically just plunge into an abyss of chaos where I don't know anything. And that's true for every first draft, and that's true for every new project. So the same was true for Hedge. Obviously, because I've written so many short stories over the years and wrote a first novel, The Balcony, which was a novel and story. So every chapter is also a short story. Obviously, I've had a lot of practice, and that part of my brain, that structural craft part of my brain, I hope is reasonably developed. But my process is not to map things out or to, I mean, I keep a notebook, but I barely even, and I write in it about a project, but I barely even look at it again. I just kind of live in the chaotic dream abyss of the story for several months before I even start to figure out what I have. So I think with Hedge, there were two seeds. One was that I got divorced at 43. I had two young daughters. One was 7 and one was 12. And I bought I was on my own. My first marriage, I met my first husband when I was 20. I was on my semester or my year abroad in France. And, we were married for almost 20 years. So I was sort of all of a sudden on my own in the world with these two girls. On my own with a great support system and a great co-parent, but still on my own. And I bought a house, and I couldn't really afford to do anything to the inside because I was on my own, like figuring out how the hell, to work all this money stuff. And so what I did was I put all of that energy of, remodeling or fixing things into the backyard, which was kind of a crappy little strip. So I was doing a lot of gardening and doing it pretty poorly, not really knowing what I was doing, but making the place mine and kind of discovering the joy of gardening in this new, deep way. And at the same time, I had met someone, I went on a first date. I married my first date. It's just incredibly boring. But, that spring after I'd moved out about the house, I met a fellow writer, and we started to have this email love story. But I had these two girls that I was responsible for, and the three of us were trying to create our new unit in our home together. And there was all, of course, the difficulty of a family breaking apart. So I was dealing with all of that, and I think that was sort of that was the undertow that brought me to this story of Maud. Mm-hmm. And then, so that was kind of the emotional truth of the book, or the emotional motivator of the book. And then the intellectual motivator was that I started to read about gardens and gardening, and that led me to garden history. And then I became completely obsessed with it. There should be an addendum to this book of the 300 pages about gardens and garden history that I had to cut out, because my editor, Lee Newman, who was great, she was like, you got to cut these 5 pages describing how these gardens were discovered in England, which isn't even the setting of this book. But I was so interested, and I made a bunch of research trips to Monticello because that was the closest historical landmark where this kind of work had been done. And the crew there was so wonderful. The head of grounds and gardens, the head of archaeology, they took me around. They showed me what the work they're still doing there to understand not only the work that Thomas Jefferson did, but the greater work of the enslaved population, which basically kept his garden alive, and really did all of the work. And there's just fascinating work being done there on the mountain about that community. So I spent a lot of time obviously writing the book, but I am glad that I never did the tally of how many hours of research I did on this book, because it would probably be, the equivalent of 2 years of reading and visiting places. But I loved that. That was part of the joy of writing it. So,
how long did it take you to write the book?
Oh my goodness, I'm so bad at time. let's see. I would say it probably took 2 years. But then, when you sell a book, then there's a couple years while it's in production, everything.
Right.
So it feels like it's been a really long time, but I think the actual process of writing it was 2 years. I wrote the first draft, a very messy first draft, over one summer. I mentioned my husband is a writer, and I said to him, I just want to finish a project this summer. And so he created this, he's also very good at Excel. So he created this Excel spreadsheet. This is very unlike me, by the way, to use an Excel spreadsheet, where I just logged in every morning. I logged in the time I started writing, and then it would automatically just keep track of the word count. And so that summer, I sat in my garden every morning. I logged in my time. I just wrote, worked on this book, again, in chaos, like took breaks to prune or weed. And by the end of the summer, I had the first draft. Now, that first draft I rewrote, significantly once, and again, pretty significantly a second time. It actually took place at Monticello, and I ended up moving the entire first part of the book to New York. So, I mean, there were major revisions, but
I love that. He needs to sell that spreadsheet, because when I was writing, I wrote down on a piece of paper, like, this is the date, this is how much the word count was, and
oh,
that's how
okay.
I did it. But I hand wrote it and I didn't put how much
Yeah.
time. I just went based on the word count.
It's so gratifying, isn't it, to see the words add up?
Yes. And when I was like, my goal was 1,000 words. And if I was over 1,000, I'm like, woo, I'm going to finish early.
That's excellent. Yeah, I'll send you the spreadsheet. I've sent it to a lot of writers
Oh, yeah.
since.
Well, sell it. Tell them to sell it.
Right. Our next million.
Yes. Yes. We'll make him famous. I love it. So did you always know you wanted to be a writer? Like, what was your major at UC Santa Cruz?
No, I wanted to go into environmental law.
My bachelor's, my master's are in law. So I love it.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, neat. Yeah. I mean, that's what I wanted to do. So I don't know if it's been named. I went to UC Santa Cruz College 8 at the time. This was in the 90s. It was College 8. No one had donated enough money, I guess, to name the college. And it was the kind of the science-y college. But I learned pretty quickly that that was not the route to go. I mean, it's interesting looking back. Again, one of the themes of Hedge is how we look back and we try to understand our life story with time. And I don't really understand why I thought I would do well in a science college, because it's really not my area of strength. But after the first year, or within the first year, I decided to major in English, which had always been my thing in high school. And so I majored in English, and which was wonderful. And then I went to France and I did a master's degree there in English. It was in English literature, but my research was all in French because I was comparing William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury to the French Cubist movement and art. And then I taught there for about 4 years. And that's when I started to write short stories. It was really after I did the graduate degree. So I think it was my way back in to literature in this new way of writing. And I wrote stories. I was really committed to the story form. I didn't even think about writing a novel. I just loved, and I still love, that compact world you can create with a short story. And it was from there that I applied to the graduate program, the writing seminars at Johns Hopkins, which is how I ended up in Baltimore, where I have remained.
You are a smart cookie.
I don't know that I'm a smart cookie,
Oh,
but
I don't know. Teaching at Johns Hopkins and, grad degrees.
well, I went to grad school there. Yeah, I went to grad school there, and
they
was
don't
great.
accept the non-smart.
I guess I'm a smart enough cookie. Ish.
When do you find the time for the writing? You said that you spent the one summer, but in between teaching and raising children, like, what does that look like? What's the writing process? Do you have rituals? This is my new favorite question is, do you light a candle? And what
Yeah.
does that look like?
So I write best in the morning, definitely. So what I try to do during the academic year, it's hard. In fact, you're interviewing me kind of at the hardest moment to write new work because, as I said, I'm spending so much of my time editing and critiquing, and I try in my classes to be very positive and and we always have a discussion about what's working well in the piece before we talk about hesitations and questions. But still, it's an editorial activity, and so that part of my brain gets overdeveloped during the academic year about my own work as well. So at this point in the year, I pretty much look at everything I write and think it's complete crap. So it becomes harder to have that, faith that something interesting is actually emerging on the page. That's much easier for me in the summer. I do write during the academic year, but I have to push myself more. I do it mostly on Friday mornings. So I have a day where I don't wake up and immediately get bombarded with all of the, problems and emails for school. And so I try to block that morning to write. And then I write on the weekends. I wake up before everybody, which is easy around here.
And they're older.
Yeah. And I write even for at this point in the year, even for a half hour, 45 minutes on the weekends. I'm working on a couple new stories and on this other big, messy, chaotic thing that might turn out to be nothing. So that's how I do it. Mornings. But it's important for me to have kind of a set day and time. So that would be Friday mornings for me. During the summer, I write a lot more. I try to write 4 hours, at least 3 hours, pretty much every weekday.
Wow.
And so that I do that's my job, basically. I get up and I often write in my garden. And I guess ritualistically speaking, tea and coffee, which is not great because I get overcaffeinated. So, yeah, I've actually switched to decaf because being hyper is not conducive to good writing in my case. Yeah. So I would say going outside. And so I wake up, and while the tea is brewing, this sounds cheesy, but it's true. I go outside and I look at all the plants and see what's happened overnight. So that gets me in the mode of just observing and listening and looking and not thinking so much.
Mm-hmm.
And then I start writing. And I block everything. I put do not disturb on. I put my phone away and I just try to shut everything out.
That's smart. Totally left field, but have you watched on AMC Lucky Hank?
No, but someone was just talking to me about this.
Because I feel like you're the female real life version, but in a good way, because he's very depressed and in his own
professor of writing.
Yes. And his wife is moving to New York because she's chasing her career.
And really?
Yes. And he's talking to his students. He's at community college. And he basically tells them they're all below average, and that's why they're at community college, and they'll never become writers. And it's this weird, like, we keep watching it, but I don't know if we're hooked or not. But there's now one more episode, so we're like, okay, we're invested enough. But
yeah,
talking to you reminds me of it.
Right?
Yes.
The parody of that whole writing professor. I know who told me about this. My colleague, who's a wonderful fiction writer, Betsy Boyd. She texted me. She's watching it, and she said it was completely hilarious. So yeah, this is the second person who's told me this recently. So.
Yes, it feels very parallel in a way, especially when we talk about the book and Hedge and what Maud does and going away. And I'm like, oh, that's like his wife, and she's going away. And yeah, it's great. It just reminds me of it. And we just watched last night again because we have to DVR it because commercials are too much.
Right.
So it's fresh on my brain, but you have to definitely go watch because you'll relate to it, I think.
That will be up after Succession. We're right now we're going through every season of Succession.
We haven't gotten into that yet, but maybe we should try not to. Okay.
No, trying not to hear any spoilers about it. I'm saying we're trying to watch the whole thing without, being exposed to the spoilers that are everywhere.
I love it. It's too funny. Yes, it's very. What do your students think? You've got this novel coming out. I mean, if you were my professor, I'd be like, oh my gosh, this is so cool.
Oh, you're so nice. It's funny. My writing life and my teaching life feel so separate. I don't really talk about. I talk about the writing process anecdotally, but I don't really talk about the publishing stuff in the classroom that much. But they're so supportive. They show up for my readings, and they're they're just wonderful. I'm really lucky. I mean, I've been at the University of Baltimore. It was my first job out of grad school, and I just got really lucky and stayed and have just sort of moved through the ranks. So I love it there, and I love my students. And if I'm feeling tired right now, that's not because of them. That's just because there's so much talking and teaching, and sort of I get tired of hearing myself talk, which is great since I'm going on book tour soon. So I'm going to be really sick of hearing myself talk.
It's the year of talking for Jane. Like, you can't get away from it.
I mean, it is ironic. It's an ironic thing about teaching writing. I do feel, for me and for many people, writing comes from silence and introspection and letting things, come to you quietly and being a little confused. But then, of course, when we teach writing, I mean, there are elements of craft that we can teach, and there are, errors that we can point out in punctuating dialogue. And I mean, all of that is completely legitimate, but it feels contradictory to me sometimes that telling how to write, when in fact so much of writing is just letting things emerge. I mean, I think the best teacher is a great book. So I do encourage my students to read a lot and read work that they're not necessarily attracted to initially, but that can show them something new that they can then apply in their own work. But I teach graduate and undergraduate students, and the undergraduate students, many of them have never written anything before in terms of creative writing. So that's a different kind of joy than with the grad students who, have been at this for quite a while and are, pros in their own way. But to see people write their first story and sort of discover that creative vein. I'm teaching one of those classes this semester, and it's really wonderful to watch that happen and see people discover voice and what's interesting. Like, my life is interesting. I can mine my own life and my own experience and bring it to the page and captivate the people in this room with these stories that seemed uninteresting because they were mine. I love that. I love that. I love watching that discovery.
I'm slowly discovering that as I contemplate what's next. And, is it fiction? Do I go down that route? And what do I have? And what can I have that I can pull from, but yet not say it's really me, per se, but create something out of it. And it is interesting, like you said, because as I'm taking notes in my Google Doc, I'm like, oh, I could do that. And no one would really know.
Well, it's a great thing. I think memoirists are so brave. I mean, I'm all about fiction, not having to necessarily, talk about what's real and what's not real. And it's definitely my genre. I mean, I'm happy writing personal essays sometimes. Sometimes one will come to me and I will really get it. But I really do admire memoirists who can just lay it all out there.
Do you think people can do both?
Oh, yeah. I mean, some people, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's an amazing skill to be able to do both. I mean, again, in Hedge, there are obviously parallels with my own life, but I'm very clear on what's actually factually true. And it's not that much. It's really not that much. Mm-hmm. It's probably 3% of the book. But I think the important thing is the emotional truth. The emotional truth is completely mine. And that is, like, for me, the most important thing is my daughters and my daughter's happiness. That's just a boring truth. And
not boring. No, that's the best truth.
And so that's what fueled the book for me. Even though the characters are not, as my eldest is like, oh my God, this character of Ella, they tease me about this all the time. Even if the facts of the characters aren't the same, like the love that Maud feels and that crazy love, I know that love.
Yeah. Oh, I love that part. I'm glad you mentioned that because, like I said, I read the book and then there were certain parts and I'm like, I wish I could just get on the phone with you right then and be like, okay, we got to do the interview now. It's fresh in my head. But when there is that part where someone, was it her sister or Maud's sister, says like, you're crazy in love with your kids. And that single line hit me. And I just looked at my kids and I was like, oh shit, I am crazy in love with them.
Yeah.
Darn it.
It's pretty nutty how in love we are with these people, isn't it?
Yes.
But they grow up and they go and have their own lives and you still love them as much. But I'm at this point in my life now where I'm, realizing, okay, in a year they will both be off, and so then it's just this whole recalibration of your existence. Luckily, I've always had a lot going on, and I've had my writing, right, and because it's tough when they go, but that's of course what we're preparing them to do that. So there's another contradiction.
I think a lot of moms forget that, though. I know that when my kids were very young, and I've shared this on the show before, I started working for myself, and I was doing it it was very small, it was little, and I would always tell the other moms, like, I'm doing this because they're going to go to school in 5 years. 5 years
Yeah,
they're going to school, and I will have something. And now I'm looking at them going, oh, in 10 years, they are out of the house.
right.
Okay, I keep looking at not that I'm excited to get them going, but I'm
Right.
thinking of what can I do to prepare myself that, you know, they didn't go to kindergarten and I went, "Oh, I have nothing to do now. What am I gonna
Yeah,
do? I need to discover myself." I think that it's so important to have something as they continue on.
right. And I think that's a huge theme of Hedge, isn't it? And for Maud, it's the huge crisis of Hedge.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think all of us who have kids, I mean, it's another reinvention too, which could be kind of exciting. What comes next? I mean, so much of our lives as parents, I don't think this is just mothers, is consumed with like first keeping these other people alive, which for me, I have anxiety issues, so that was a big that was a big job in the first years. But then just kind of we're always just attending to their schedule, and I mean, life kind of the rhythms of life revolves around those
Mhm.
those planets, and then when they're gone, it's like there's just this suddenly you're in outer space, and it's like, well, what next? Which is sad, but also can be, I think, exciting. It can be a new phase of life. So I'm not quite there yet, but I'm definitely starting to think about it.
You can write
As
more.
as we finish SAT season around here.
Yuck.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think they're getting rid of them soon though, so
I thought so, but apparently, I don't know. Apparently, they're still around enough that a couple of weeks ago, I mean, my daughter actually handled it with complete aplomb. I was a wreck all morning. I was so distracted.
10
But
more
yeah,
years, like I said. We'll see what happens in 10.
yeah, yeah,
Maybe they'll be gone.
yeah. Maybe by the time yours are juniors in high school, the SAT will be out of there.
Yeah, we'll
I
see.
wish that for you and them.
They'll just put it in a computer and AI will spit out whatever
Oh no, I
auto-generated
know.
answers are for them.
I know, I know. And this interview will just be all done by AI, and the book will have been written by AI.
No, not in the world that we live in, I hope. Oh, Jane, where can everyone find you and buy Hedge?
So you can find me at www.janedelury.com. And that's probably the best place to go because there are links to my link tree to buy the book.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm so
Thank
excited for
you.
you. Congratulations, because today will be pub day.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm so excited. Thank you.
We'll pretend.
Yes. This was so fun. Thank you so much,
Thank you
Michelle.
so much. Okay, friends, Hedge better be on your TBR list now. Go buy it. It is available everywhere books are available. And today it comes out to the rest of the world. I am so excited. I want you all to read it. I feel like we should all be planting new gardens while reading it and enjoying the sunshine. I'm so grateful for Jane to have brought this book into the world and to be educating us, not just with her novel of, being able to entertain us, but to educate us on what it is that Maud did for a living, because I was absolutely fascinated. And I think that's one of the great parts of being able to escape into a book and learn something while also enjoying what you're reading. So please go grab your copy of Hedge today, and a big thank you and congratulations to Jane and the entire Zibby Books team.